So I know we're staying spoiler-free up front, but all of you who have seen the episode already, you're just as excited as I am, right? Right? Oh my god! Yes! Hello, interwebs! I hope you are all ready because I am so freaking excited, like legitimately so freaking excited to talk about the third episode of Star Trek Picard Season 3, this one titled 17 Seconds. Now, two things to say right up front. Number one, I will stay spoiler-free for the first minute or two of this review, so if you have not seen the episode yet, just know that the thing I'm very excited about, I will not spoil for you, so don't worry there, but we will get to it. And number two, for those of you wondering, I also don't know what's going on with this cosplay. I ordered one of the monster maroons for like a wedding cosplay event that I was going to, and I got this like weird Mirror Universe uniform instead. I mean, it's pretty cool looking, but it's ill-fitting and kind of weird, but damn it, it's cool. And in a weird way, without spoiling anything, it's kind of a little apropos. But anyways, regardless, let's talk spoiler-free of this episode. This was another really strong episode of the season so far. I think first and foremost, what I loved this episode for was its amazingly strong acting, mostly from our classic characters. Patrick Stewart and Gates McFadden in particular, but also Jonathan Frakes, as well as a few others like Jerry Ryan and some of the new cast as well, all get amazing scenes, but the real highlight is Patrick Stewart and Gates McFadden delivering one of the best scenes of Star Trek Picard, period, in this entire series. It is incredibly good, but it is all anchored by really well-written dialogue and just emotional scenes that allow characters to really go into the depth and nuance of the situation. That really feels like Star Trek down to its core, especially Next Generation, which was always the more talky Trek of all of them. And it does mix in some action as well in true fashion of some other Star Trek shows like Deep Space Nine and more modern Star Treks. In fact, the episode that this most reminds me of is the recent Memento Mori Gorn episode from Star Trek Strange New Worlds, because we are also very similarly dealing with a starship in a nebula hiding from another ship. So it has some of the same beats there, but I think some of the internal struggles within the crew on the ship are very different than what was going on with Strange New Worlds. So while the setup is similar, I think the dynamics are very different. So it was just cool to see a similar setup and action beats, but within a different sort of emotional framework, which is, again, what I'm liking Picard for, is sort of this mixing and matching of many different eras of Star Trek and sort of bringing them together in a really cohesive way. That being said, though, the plot of the series does kick into high gear a little bit towards the end of this episode, and without spoiling, you should get very, very excited about it. And that's really about all I can say, staying spoiler-free. So if you have not seen the episode yet, dear God, jump off here, because we are about to get into it. So I'm going to give you a couple seconds, because I just got to yell about it. Okay. Changelings! Holy shit, everybody! It's the goddamn Changelings! I knew that they were gonna do some sort of like Deep Space Nine references here, but they are legit continuing off of the end of Deep Space Nine with the goddamn Changelings. I am so excited when that happened, when that reveal came up. I'm like, oh shit, Terry Matalas, you goddamn madman! I am so freaking pumped for where this goes. Please do not do me wrong, because this was, as a Deep Space Nine fan, my heart just like sang at that. And I also love paranoia thriller stuff, and it's just like the best parts of some of the Changeling storylines from Deep Space Nine might be coming forward here, and I am so ready. My Trekkie body is ready. I am prepped. Take me, Changelings, take me. Anywho, let's actually go through the episode beat by beat, and we'll talk about everything, but I just had to yell about that, because the moment that happened, I was freaking the fuck out. Sorry for my language, but goddamn, that was holy shit. So getting into it, we start off the episode kind of giving us the stakes in the situation. The Titan is sort of hidden in this nebula, and they're trying to hide from Vadic, ship the Shrike, and they can use the nebula to hide themselves. So that's our setup, very similar, like I said, to the Strange New Worlds episode from last year. But then we get an interesting scene after the opening credits where we see a flashback beat with Riker and Picard in the Guinan's bar, 10 forward, right after Thaddeus had been born to Riker. And a couple things that I liked about the scene, but one big thing that I did not was I am not a big fan of de-aging technology. It always just weirds me out and throws me out of the scene. Some people can get over it more than others, but for me, literally every time I see de-aging in a scene, it just is weird, because they're clearly their age and just have like a smooth face put on top of them for both Patrick Stewart and Riker. So it was just weird seeing like a younger looking Riker and Picard, but having like like older voices. It was very uncanny valley, and I never like it. I've very rarely, if ever, seen de-aging technology done well. No shade at the visual effects department. You are killing it in other areas of this episode. Just that bit in particular, I don't think anyone has nailed, even the like magic wizards at Disney. That being said, I do love Riker's sort of like post Deep Space Nine Nemesis uniform that he's got there. I thought that was very cool looking. But then I more love the dialogue of this scene, because it was Riker talking about him becoming a father to Thad, who is the child that we know does pass away, and we get some reference to that later in the episode. So it was nice to see that continuity from season 1 there, and him sort of being like, this is when I became a father, those 17 seconds on the turbolift when I was worried if he was going to die or not. And that becomes a great echo emotional beat for Picard later on in the episode, but I thought it was just a good telling moment for Riker as a parent. And it's becoming very clear to me that this season seems to be very much about being a parent, being a someone passing on to the next generation, as it were. So that's very much a theme of this season of the show, and that's coming out here, and I thought it was well-written dialogue. One thing I did think of, though, is the fact that this is Riker on the original Titan that we've seen in Lower Decks, which made you wonder, is Boimler on the ship? Is Boimler there? I want to know where Boimler is.
Too many licks and not enough cum. What does that even mean?
Give me my Boimler crossover. I know it's coming in Strange New Worlds, but give me my Boimler crossover, damn it. We also get to see Marina Sirtis as Deanna Troi for a brief moment in there, yelling about being a mom and say, hey, come and help me. Riker being a deadbeat dad there. I very much felt Marina Sirtis more than Deanna Troi in that moment, but it was just a funny little appearance for her. I'm sure we'll get more of her as the season goes on. Oh, also, I just like Riker and Picard sort of broing out, too. That was kind of cute. Actually, on that note, I really like the rapport between Patrick Stewart and Jonathan Frakes this season, where they get to be more equals and friends. You know, even back during the Next Generation era and movies, they still kind of had this, like, power imbalance because Riker was his first officer. But now they're, like, vaguely equals, and actually that dynamic gets shifted in this episode. I just like their rapport a lot. It just feels like brothers in arms in a lot of ways, and I really enjoyed it. We then cut to Seven of Nine's quarters, and of course she has a Voyager model that's very sweet and endearing. But then she gets called on by LaForge. I did like this scene. I thought LaForge was being very sweet, reaching out to Seven and saying, hey, we're both misfits, we both don't belong, and getting us to learn a little bit about LaForge's character. However, it is a bit weird considering that she's, I think, like an ensign or a lieutenant. I forget exactly her rank, but she's much lower ranked than Seven is. And I know Seven's been sort of taken off of duty, but it is still weird to be like, hey, first officer, we're gonna connect as friends, but I guess Seven doesn't really care much for rank, you know, considering she was a Fenris Ranger, but it was still a weird beat if you thought about the power dynamics involved. Like, I definitely wouldn't have gone to my boss and done that. Like, I would have been weirded out. But then we cut over to Beverly and Jack helping out the medical crew, and we have a very rude medical officer, though I guess they are understandably upset given the situation. We see a little bit of these moments with like the Starfleet crew being angry at Jack and Beverly a little bit based on the fact that they're in this situation because of them. So maybe that's a little bit of that, but it still was just like, wow, dang, people are very rude. But what I did like about this was seeing not only Beverly help, which, you know, fits her character, but Jack helping as well. I like seeing that Jack is always going to be there to help people. It makes him a very different type of character than, like, let's say a Han Solo-esque character who would be like, all right, I got what I want and I'm not going to care about anything. Like, this Jack is a person who does care, and it makes him a little bit more Robin Hood than Han Solo, and I liked that sort of like distinction with him. But then we get to probably my favorite scene of the entire episode, which is Picard going to talk to Beverly Crusher. And I want to say Gates McFadden because both she and Patrick Stewart nailed this scene. This scene needed to be good because the entire plot of this season hinges upon the fact that Beverly did not tell Picard that she had an illegitimate child with him. And because of that being like the big plot crux of the season, if this scene did not sell the fact that she hid it from him, that there was an emotional reason that we could believe, it would all fall apart. It would feel very forced as a plot beat, and very much that jump the shark moment that I was talking about in my review of last episode. But it works. The dialogue is very well written, and the acting is so on point. It is so good from both of them that you really, really believe that Beverly chose to not reveal Jack's being born. I loved the discussion of her being like, you are always going to be doing something. You always are called to the stars. And you said numerous times, as we saw in the Next Generation itself, that he was never really wanting to be a parent at any point in his life. And so she sort of thought like, well, why tell him because of all those reasons? And it is believable, But you understand, and I side personally with Picard being like, I had a right to know, and you see his anger, and Patrick Stewart plays this wonderful balance between being angry at Beverly, but also still caring for her, still like loving her in his way. I doubt it's romantic considering he has Laris, but still having a deep affection for her. And so there's this perfect thing of like him being angry, but not overly angry, not like blasting out at her. I thought that was a really great balance. And I love some of the call-outs of them like having sex on like they had a romantic getaway, and Picard being like, we cut it off for what, the 4th time? Which like all the Beverly Picard shippers from back in the day on The Next Generation, like, yes, they constantly were going back and forth and the writers were just never letting them actually do anything. It was very frustrating.
Each of us feels. Perhaps we should not be afraid to explore those feelings.
Or perhaps we should be afraid.
But anyways, it was just nice to call that out and make it just very textual with the characters. And I thought this scene was just truly magnificent from both of them. But then this cuts to another really great scene where we have Riker looking at Jack Crusher like a little amoeba. And he's just like, I saw you getting cooked up between your parents for years. It was very frustrating for me too, as a Beverly Picard shipper myself, as Riker says. Basically, I think it's funny. But I love this talk between the two where he sort of says, Riker says to Jack, it's like, look, these people are sacrificing their lives for you, are putting themselves in danger for you. You didn't ask for that, but now you have to own it, and you have to make them feel good about having made this decision, or have this decision made for them. And so I thought that was like a great sense of like taking on the mantle of responsibility on Jack. Even though he is not part of Starfleet, didn't ask for those things, he will take it on because he is Picard's son, even though he doesn't wish to accept that. And that sort of creates this rift between Picard and Jack, because Picard doesn't really want to hang out with Jack. He doesn't even want to spend time with him. He doesn't really see himself as his father yet. And so I like that there's this, Picard's like, all right, I gotta go, and sort of ignores Jack here. Oh, also another weird thing that got pointed out was Beverly said that Jack has a London British accent because he went to school in London. That just seems like a nice, like, oh, we need to excuse why he has the same accent as Picard. I just found that funny. But then we have an attack by the Shrike because they're able to find the Titans somehow, and Shaw gets hurt, and he passes the command codes over to Riker. And again, Shaw doesn't get a lot to do this episode, but it is just kind of funny that he's just like, all right, peace, I'm done, out, you deal with it now. It kind of does fit his character being kind of a little bit of a coward asshole, and he's just like, all right, now it's your responsibility. I'm going to get healed right now. And so Riker becomes the captain. I love this dynamic shift between Riker and Picard, that Picard becomes the number one to Riker. And there's a tension between the two, where Picard would normally get to call the shots, but Riker is sort of pushing against him and he has the control. It's just a great dynamic shift for these two characters that we've seen in basically the other dynamic for decades at this point. But then we get another attack by the Shrike. They find them again, and they start to try to get away from the Shrike. They're going to try and warp out of the nebula, but the Shrike starts thinking with portals and uses the portal technology to continually force the Titan back into the nebula. This was really cool. I just loved seeing like big portal technology being used in a starship battle. It was just kind of fun. This is like an idea that you've never really seen, at least in Star Trek before. You think you would have. So it's just cool seeing like portal tech being used to play with a starship. It was just kind of a fun dynamic as well in the action. And it also means that they can't escape the nebula. They keep getting pulled back in. But then we have Jack realizing that there must be some sort of leak on board that is causing the Shrike to continually find them. So he goes to 7 because the crew doesn't trust him enough to go to the bridge to tell them this. Which I like that the crew still doesn't fully trust Jack. And he goes to 7. I love that he convinces her and they punch out the guard and the door sort of closes on them. I thought that was hilarious. But then they go and find that there is in fact a gas leak from the warp nacelles, and it's caused by a saboteur on the ship, which is what allows Riker and Picard to possibly shift the dynamic. And you have Picard advocating for attacking the Shrike and going after them, like really going after them, and Riker being like, no, we need to protect the crew. And you sort of see Picard sort of having this like aggressive stance being a parent, and that is compounded in just a moment because we have Jack Crusher getting attacked by one of the Starfleet crew who shapeshifts after he gets hit. So when I was watching that, I was like, what? What was that? Excuse me? But I thought it'd be like, okay, it couldn't be what I thought it was. But it was very weird. And we have Jack waking up and he sees 7 standing over him, which I thought initially was the shapeshifter, but turns out it was actually Seven, but there's this weird red viney stuff behind her. So I'm wondering what's going on with Jack. Clearly, Jack is wanted by the, well, let's say Vadic for right now, for some reason, and maybe it has something to do with whatever the red vines that he's seeing. It's an interesting thing going on there. I'm curious to see where that's going to go. But because of this, he's got injured, and Picard has to go down in the turbolift for 17 seconds to go and see if Jack is going to survive. And again, I loved this because it echoes back to what Riker was saying at the beginning of the episode, but it's the moment where Picard becomes a dad. And this is the moment where he starts to see himself as Jack's father that we haven't seen him being for the entire episode so far. And it also informs why he's being so aggressive in wanting to attack Vadic, like wanting to protect his son so desperately. And I just love that that's the emotional beat that this hinges upon. I thought that was a really strong evocative emotional beat for him. But with that said, before we finish out that storyline, let's jump over to Raffi and Worf. I adored seeing Michael Dorn back as Worf. He is pitch perfect. He looks great. I love Silver Fox Worf. I am all here for it. I love his like chamomile tea joke. He's like, I'm Slayer of Gowron, which I love to see that reference. Spoilers for Deep Space Nine. And he is just like, he seems much more like in tune with himself, as he says, working on himself. And I love that he's grown as a character. He's not so like gung-ho, like kind of toxic masculinity sometimes that he evoked in Next Generation, a little less so, but still sometimes in Deep Space Nine. He's grown a lot more as a character, and he's trying to pass this on to Raffi, who is also sort of enacting that sort of like gung-ho, want to get things done, trying to sacrifice everything around her to sort of do her duty, but sometimes blinding herself to the choices that she's making. I thought that was a great sort of discussion about sacrifice, what you give, and how you can sort of temper that and find balance. And I love that it's coming from Worf. Again, it's just showing that he has grown as a character in the 20 years since we've met him, and I loved seeing that. And I also loved the report when they went to catch this guy who, by the way, I believe is Thomas Dekker, the guy that they captured. I may be wrong on that, but Thomas Dekker, he played John Connor in Terminator: The Sarah Connor Chronicles. I didn't look at the cast list, so I may be wrong. He just may look like him, but I thought for a minute, it's like, is that Thomas Dekker? John Connor? Was he still stuck in the future? What happened at the end of Terminator: Sarah Connor Chronicles? I gotta know. Anywho, I love Raffi and Worf's rapport where like he's like, oh, beheadings are on Wednesday. But they start to interrogate this guy. And he is clearly, something's up with him. They think it's withdrawal, but he reveals that the attack on the Starfleet base was a distraction, that they actually were stealing something else from the Daystrom Institute, not just the portal tech. So curious to see what that's going to be. My guess, this is just my guess, so I have no idea yet, it's lore. They went to steal lore, because we know lore's coming in the trailers, so maybe Vadic went to go and steal lore for some reason or another. So that's my guess, what they were trying to get from the station. But anyways, the bigger reveal, though, here is, holy shit, they're changelings. As soon as he started to change, and Worf said, how long have you been away from the Great Link? I'm like, oh shit. And we get this explanation from Worf that I'm like, oh, this is so cool, that apparently, after the end of Deep Space Nine, where the Dominion War ended, Odo, and we get a nice little reference, oblique reference to Odo there. I wish they had said his name, but you get some oblique reference to him. And we learn that Odo sort of was trying to temper the Great Link, but there was still a faction that, and it makes sense because they were kind of forced to end the Dominion War. They didn't really want to end the Dominion War, but the Chainlings were forced to based on the Starfleet virus that was sent there, that a splinter faction broke off to try and go and still attack Starfleet and wanting to destroy them. And that Odo had warned Worf, and Worf was working undercover to try to stop them. This actually makes perfect sense. I love that it's building upon the storyline of Deep Space Nine, but like using Next Generation characters, but still bridging to Deep Space Nine in a really cool way. And just, again, anything to do with Deep Space Nine, but especially the changelings, I am so here for. Especially since we're dealing with like changelings within Starfleet again, which was some of the coolest storylines in Deep Space Nine, like the episodes Homefront back in Deep Space Nine, some of my favorites, where it's like, what do we sacrifice for security in order to try to protect ourselves if we don't know who the enemy is? That sort of like security versus freedom argument, and it was just so good. And I'm so glad that they're going to bring that back up here, because I sometimes feel they didn't fully utilize that in Deep Space Nine to its fullest, the sort of paranoia of the changelings. So it's great to see this possibly coming back. Like, I am so freaking pumped, and this causes us to go over back to the Titan, because we hear that Jack says, okay, there's changelings on board, and this causes Riker and Picard to be like, all right, we need to get off this station. We need to get out of this nebula. So Picard argues with Riker to attack the Shrike. Riker does do that, but it ends up causing the Titan to get hurt and be disabled and fall into this weird anomaly, possibly leading them all to die. die. And I loved this beat for Picard because it's showing that he was overly aggressive. He wasn't really calibrating his thoughts because he was worried for his son, and it caused him to be overly aggressive. The one beat that I wasn't entirely sure on was Riker like throwing him off the bridge and being very pissed off at the end. I feel like, you know, there was, to compare to Strange New Worlds, in Memento Mori, there's moments where you see Anson Mount's Captain Pike there, very clearly being worried, but not wanting to show that worry in front of the crew because they need him to be their captain. They need to show, like, he needs to show them that they can get out of this situation.
Get a crew to believe in miracles, and I just give you one.
And I feel like Riker is a strong enough captain, too, that he would also do that he would also sort of have that ability to be like, I'm going to be the captain this crew needs me to be. So when he yells at Picard and says, get off this bridge, you've killed us all, that is showing a sense of defeat that I think Riker wouldn't necessarily have shown in front of the crew. Now, very understandably could be pissed off at Picard privately and maybe say, hey, we need to go talk right now because this is not working right now. But to say that in front of the crew at such a dark moment, I feel like is very demoralizing to your crew. And I think Riker's a little bit better than that. So that's my one major criticism of the episode. So sorry to end on a downer note in terms of the only criticism that I really have of the episode, at least majorly. Because otherwise, to wrap out, this was fantastic. This was another fantastic episode. I'm really excited for this season so far. It's like they've been nailing the action beats. They've been nailing the like character moments. The acting and the emotional scenes that we've been getting are really wonderful. And they've been selling some of the elements of the season that I'm a bit more iffy on. The only thing I'm super disappointed else too here is that we didn't get a lot of Vadic, and I really loved Vadic last episode, so I'm hoping we get to see more of her. I'm sure we will as the season goes on. So a little disappointing not to get as much of her here. But otherwise, this is another really strong episode, selling the stuff that it needed to sell and giving me some of these great emotional character beats that I really wanted to see. So yeah, I am very excited, but even more exciting, freaking changelings! Freaking changelings! We have freaking changelings! I am so excited! It's so awesome and cool! Anywho, I'm gonna go, like, stop being so excited and just calm myself. And I wish you all, my friends, a live long and prosper, and I'm curious to see your excitement in the comments below. Or non-excitement. Maybe you hate the changelings. I don't know, you. Speak for yourself. I'm curious to see.